Great. So let's go right back to the beginning. Where did you meet Mark Hall?
Whew. We were both at the same art school in Manchester. We didn't meet then, oddly enough, because he was in a different school. And then we were both offered a chance to work in television. The Granada Television had just opened to produce programmes for the North. And we had a visiting tutor. Well, I didn't know who he was. I don't know whether Mark did, but I didn't know who he was. And he was a nice fellow, you know, and he said at one point, have you ever thought of working in television? I said, that'd be good, wouldn't it? It'd be nice to, but it's hard to get into. And I didn't know that he'd been given the job of setting up the graphics department for Granada Television. Graphics was, this was back in primitive television days. There were no computer graphics. If you wanted to promote a programme, one of the graphic designers produced a piece of artwork. He took it downstairs to the studio and put it in front of the camera. That was it. That was the ad for the programme for the evening. And we were tasked with doing the opening and closing credits on shows, so it's quite basic. And then Granada bought a rostrum camera because they wanted to make the opening and closing a little bit richer. You know, let's have a bit of film. Now I saw that as an opportunity to make an animated film. So I started work on a pilot film for a children's programme. I'd produced a couple of experimental films first. And that was fun, you know. I suppose most animators start with that. But then I thought, well, if I'm going to make a business out of this, if I'm going to make a career out of it, I've got to look for a market. Experimental film's not going to take me anywhere. There were two choices back then, I suppose there still are now, doing animated commercials for television or children's programmes for television. Now, I chose children's programmes because it gave a chance to tell stories, longer stories. That's how we got into this side of the business. Mark became a graphic designer too, within Granada. And when I was making that series, I had to do everything myself. I didn't have a team. I had to design the characters. I had to work out the stories. I had to work out the storyboards. I had to animate each scene. My wife painted all the cells because it was before the colouring on computers. I did 26 of those like that. But I had to do everything, and it was a great way of learning the process of making films from start to finish. I had to lay soundtracks, I had to mix them, I had to film stuff, I had to dub it. And it was during that time that I met Eric Thompson. I'd produced the pilot film. I had put a soundtrack on it, written by one of the secretaries at Granada. And I offered it to Granada, and they took, I think, 2 years. Nothing happened. So I took it to the BBC, and they said, yes, we'll take this, yeah. We don't like your script, but we'll take it. And they said, we do have somebody who we think could do a better script. And they introduced me to this chap called Eric Thompson, who was Emma Thompson's father. Nice guy with a lovely, gentle voice, an actor. And when I met him at the home of the head of children's programmes, a lady called Doreen Stevens. And he came in all sort of fussed because he'd just got a new episode of The Magic Roundabout, and he'd got a new character, a snail, and he didn't know what to call it. And Doreen introduced me to him. That's it, he said, Brian, I'll call him Brian. So one of the things I'm proud of at the peak of my career is the name of Brian the Snail.
That is starting right at the top. So before you've got your own films commissioned, you've become something. That's a legend anyway. That's great stuff.
I feel a legend because I'm a snail, yes.
I was working as a puppet maker many years ago for Saunders, and I was subcontracted into Cosgrove Hall. And one day we had a little storage facility at the back of this basement studio, so we were all sat there fixing puppets ready for set. They'd come and they'd go out regularly, and we had a new show coming in, and my boss at the time, Patricia Brennan, she said, well, we're going to have to make some more space. So I was like, oh, great, where's that going to go? And she's like, well, there's some shelves at the back of this room in this basement that we're all in. What I need you to do is take down the shelves because that goes into another room back there. So I was like, really? What's in this other room? And she was like, well, I don't know. Just take the shelves down and just take a look. So willingly, you know, got my tools out, took down these shelves, took this piece of board off this tiny little door. And I felt like Howard Carter discovering Tutankhamun's tomb. So as I peeled it back and peered inside, there was dust and then just a little ray of light. And all I could see was shelves and shelves of puppets. I was like, wow, I couldn't believe it. So quickly, you know, we unscrewed the rest of it. We got in there, we found some lights, they worked. What were the chances? We switched it on, and, you know, it was probably my first sight of the archive that had just been stored away in Cosgrove Hall and forgotten about for years. So it was at that point I'd already started this deep fascination with Cosgrove Hall and its history. I'd seen firsthand, you know, the animations that I'd loved for years, and now I was kind of picking up puppets and looking through the bits. Anyway, news travelled fast. It went through the powers that be within Cosgrove Hall, and within 24 hours, everything was gone. It was just, we came back the next morning and it'd all been moved. I was just like, oh no, I couldn't believe it. I didn't have a real good chance to, you know, go through it all. So that was the start of my fascination with the archive.
When was that?
So that must have been in about 2002, 3-ish.
So Ronnie started, because it does sound like the plot of an animated kids show.
It was just phenomenal. I'd never seen anything like it. I was just a kid in a sweet shop. It was amazing. So that disappeared and we all carried on working, and I was fortunate enough, I was writing some stuff at the time. I went on to become a development producer for Cosgrove Hall. So I went through the motions there with the guys, and we'd done some incredible things, and I had the opportunity to fly around the world and stuff and sell cartoons, which was just, you know, it's just a dream. And then, unfortunately, the recession hit. Cosgrove Hall was struggling to get animation away. We felt as if, you know, the company was certainly struggling, and I made the decision to leave. So I joined the ranks of ITV. So I'm sat on ITV this one day, and we'd heard that Cosgrove Hall, ITV owned Cosgrove Hall, and ITV had closed the doors forever on Cosgrove. And that was that. And so everybody started speculating then, what's happening to all of the stuff? Where's all the material going? And it was just a mystery. And I think I was the only person then working in ITV at Granada Studios that perhaps might know what all of this stuff was. And then lo and behold, I was walking through one of the loading bays in Granada Studios one day, and there was just this mass of stuff. And I just instantly recognised the boxes that I'd seen, you know, 3 or 4 years previous. I was like, oh my God, it's the archive. So I just frantically started opening stuff and going around all of these bits and looking through boxes and opening drawers, and it was just huge. And it just arrived on a van. They'd unloaded it and left it. And there it kind of stood, I think, for about 12 months, which is when I started to make some noise, I suppose, in ITV, and asked who owned it, where was it going. I don't think it should be lost. And I think then the more I thought about it, the more I came to this conclusion, well, I suppose a very quick conclusion, that what was left of Cosgrove Hall was part of Manchester's cultural heritage. That started, arguably, the animation industry on a big scale in the UK.
you know, working with Peter Saunders, who was there, we sort of pushed animation together. Wind in the Willows was the first time we'd really done lip sync. You know, Peter thought he could do it, and Mark wanted it, and Wind in the Willows seemed the perfect vehicle to have the characters talking. And I think the joy of Cosgrove Hall is you could contribute. You could say, I think this would be quite good.
So there is always that issue.
It was never a job.
Never a job.
It was fun.
Ask, when you went in, I was asking about the atmosphere of the place. Did you feel as though you were pioneers, or did you feel you were part of some great avant force, or what?
That's probably a bit grand, but you know, because there was animation around.
Yeah.
And you know, of course, Mr. Harryhausen. But I think things like the Pied Piper hadn't been done in Britain before. And the detail, Mark loved detail and textures, and one of the joys of stop motion is texture. You know, if you look at things like Danger Mouse, the colours and a flat, the backgrounds have texture, but when you light a puppet, it has shadows, and you want to sculpt a puppet so you can see every lump and bump on wart on him. You want to make the most of the textures with gobos that reflect dapple lighting on the floor, so when a character moves, it changes the lighting. Texture, Mark was very keen on. Pied Piper is full of texture, of the fur of the rats and the griminess of the houses and the clothes. And Wind in the Willows has shiny cars and leaves and grass and water. And yes, Mark loved detail, and I don't think, certainly when Wind of the Willows came, there hadn't been a children's programme with such production values. What does it look like today? Budgets and technology has changed, but what I would just like to talk about is the filming of Wind in the Willows. We don't do it like that anymore. We didn't have any video technology. So there was no way of checking the animation you'd just done. You moved it, and that move was gone. You couldn't get it back, okay? And so it led to sort of a slightly different mindset to animators today. You sort of were immersed in that character, and you really had to concentrate. And, you know, this became your video recorder. There was no way of checking, and I think we were shooting Wind in the Willows on 16mm, and it probably took about 4 or 5 days before we'd shot a cartridge, and then they had to go off to Leeds, I think it was. They went to Leeds to be developed, the film, and we had stories of rolls of can disappearing over in the Pennines, cans of film disappearing over the Pennines, and so you couldn't wait for the rushes. Sometimes we had to build a set and we had to move on, so we had to strike the set. You had to get it right, which was exciting. You know, the video technology today is brilliant for giving finesse, and if something's going wrong, you can see it's going wrong. And you sort of stop before it goes too wrong. And it's a safety net. It's a good safety net because you can fine-tune. But God, it was terrifying watching rushes, because we watched them without sound, because today when you film with the sound there, and you can get the intonation, but we had bar sheets where the sound was written down, and we had a really ropey, you know, cassette player of the dialogue, and you would listen to it and try and match it up to the bar sheet of how many frames did Toad take to say that word, and you tried to find the emphasis. But we shot for a week without seeing it, and watching the rushes on a Friday afternoon without sound was terrifying. And sometimes you'd see Toad was doing this, and he went like that, and everybody in the theatre, "Oh, Barry," and I said, "Wait," and you played the soundtrack, and Toad would go. You see, it wasn't a jerk. There was a purpose to that move, but you were so exposed in rushes because it was raw.
Brian had come down to West Surrey College of Art, not to look for puppet makers, which is what I'd begun to specialise in whilst I was at Art College. He'd come down to look for young animators to work on a special that they were going to do, and I think that was The Talking Parcel, which was a 2D drawn cartoon film that Thames had commissioned. And so I think he was probably doing the rounds of the art colleges, trying to find people who'd studied animation. And it was kind of almost by default that he went into the animation room where some of my work was laid out as part of my degree show. And it certainly wasn't the purpose of his visit to find puppet makers. But he'd been working across both the drawn side of Cosgrove Hall and the puppet side. There were two different departments there at the time. And he'd been developing a children's series called Far Out Fred with Mike Harding, who was the Rochdale Cowboy back in the day. And because he was getting so tied up with doing the Talking Parcel, he wanted somebody to help finish off these puppets that he'd been working on. And I think seeing the work that I'd done at Art College, he thought, oh well, here's somebody who will give 3 months' work to, and then he'll be able to finish the puppets, and we'll take it from there. And so I met him on one of the final days of my art college, and then the following Friday I was phoned up by one of the HR people at Cosgrove Hall and invited to come for an interview on the Tuesday. So I returned back to Manchester to my parents' home on the Friday, and on the Tuesday I was going for an interview at Cosgrove Hall, and on the Wednesday I got a job. So it was all a bit sudden.
You've got the diary entry there, haven't you?
Yeah. It says here, on Monday the 4th of July, so this was the degree show, it says, off to college at 11. I've just had a bath, obviously a notable event. After dinner, showed Brian Cosgrove the film I've been working on, and The Dragon. Seemed impressed, exclamation mark. Job prospects look good. So, and then I went back to my digs to have a swim. And, and then the following Tuesday, I went, organised stuff to take to Stock Frame, 12:30, set out for Manchester, interview at 3:30, lasted to 6, offered job for 3 months. So kind of it was as simple as that. And I'd never intended to return to Manchester. I'd loved being down in Guildford and Farnham at the Art College there, and I thought that was my kind of new home. But a job's a job, and I wasn't going to turn it down. And I'd seen some of the work that Mark and Brian had done, and I thought it was a great opportunity. So snapped it up. Yeah, it was exciting to be offered the job. It was a bit of an anticlimax when I got there, because Brian is a great guy, but he worked so hard that he would forget that he'd done kind of trivial things like giving a job to somebody to help finish the puppets. So on the day that I arrived there, nobody knew who I was or what I was doing there, and I said, well, I think Brian, I'm supposed to be doing some work for Brian, and Brian couldn't remember, and what have you. And so there was I thought there'd be a desk or a workshop, or, I was thinking that there'd be a red carpet rolled out for me. There was nothing. They didn't know I was going to turn up. And the only place they could find was putting me at a kind of an old desk in a corridor. So for the first couple of days, I was sat there not knowing what I was doing, and people would be passing me day in, day out, wondering who's he and what's he doing there. I had nothing to do. And then I think somebody had a discreet word with Brian, and he twigged that, oh, I must be the new boy to help him finish the puppets. So it was a bit of an odd start, but having said that, kind of never looked back from that point onwards.